Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, just let me know if there's any issues with sound or screen sharing, because yeah, I cannot really see what's going on. So, but yeah.
We definitely see your screen very clear, and your voice is audible, loud and clear. Over to you, Jasper.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks a lot. So my name is Jasper Oosterveld. I'm a modern workplace consultant for a company called Inspark. We're based in Amsterdam, Netherlands. That's also where I live. And basically, I support customers implementing the modern workplace. And it's very broad, of course, but my focus lies around Microsoft Teams these days, and then with a real focus on governance and compliance, basically that combination. So making sure people collaborate in a secure and a safe way, internally and externally. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP for, I believe, 7 years now. So how can you achieve a successful adoption for Microsoft Teams? So the presentation I'm doing is basically also the one I'm doing with our customers. So it's basically the approach we use. So we do it in 3 steps, and I will dive into each of these steps. But we first start with a governance workshop. Then we define a governance strategy with our customers. And last but not least, the governance often also needs to be implemented. So that's something we can do, or the customer does it themselves. But that's basically the last step. But before I do that, what I often do with my customers is basically take a step back and take a look at Microsoft Teams, what it is and what it can do. So what I normally also do is do a demo. I'm not doing that now because they get a little bit of a time crunch. But I will tell you what I show them along the way, because you have to realize that not everybody exactly knows what Teams is. Like most people have heard of it, especially these days, but they don't know all the ins and outs or some of the basics. So it's always good to show them, right? Just show them how you can create a team, how you work together, basically just the basic stuff. So what I tell them first, I'm telling them, of course, a little bit marketing, but it's fine once in a while, is that Teams is basically the hub for collaboration and communication. And it consists out of a couple topics. So the first one is chat. The second one is meetings. The third one is calling. That is one that I skip, because with calling, I'm more talking about the whole PBX and that story, the call centers. And that's not my specialty and also not from my company. So that's one I basically skip. But it could be an important one. So if that's in the scope of your governance, you have the expertise, you have to include it as well. I'm just not doing it for this presentation. Then we have files, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these topics after this slide. And last but not least, we have apps and workflows. So if we start with chat, you really see a couple really interesting things what you can do with chat, and that's basically create an open and informal culture. Where I live in the Netherlands, that is basically the standard, but that doesn't mean that's like that everywhere. Like there are a lot of other countries out there that have a more strict culture. It's more private, more closed, more formal. And I think chat is a nice way to open it up, to break it open. Because it's just a different way of communicating. It's more fast, more quick. It's also less. It's more open, right? It's more informal, right? You have all the fun stuff, the giffies, the smileys. It's just a different way of communicating. So chat can definitely help if that's one of your goals, to create more of an open and informal culture within your company. And the second one I think most people will really like is that you will reduce email. What I do find interesting is that instead of we get less email, but we get more notifications. That's maybe I think a lot of people are recognizing that the notifications are taking the place of email. That said, there are ways to reduce your notifications as well. So that's something you can explain to your employees, how they can do that through the settings. You can also, for example, try what you can do, for example, is turn off the option to mention a whole team or mention a whole channel. That also reduces notifications. But yeah, in theory, there is less email, so that's always nice because that means we can focus on other things. Well, this one is a little bit aimed at pre-corona of COVID-19 times, because basically if we were on the road, or maybe on the road now, once in a while, it is nice that you can still communicate and collaborate with your colleagues. by using the app. And I think that's definitely one of the best apps that Microsoft has created. Not perfect, of course not, but I think it's definitely one of their better ones. And I use it on a daily basis. Now, of course, we have meetings. You can have more efficient meetings, as we call it. You can kind of compare it to what we're doing now, right? I'm sharing my screen. I'm doing a presentation. You're listening in. Well, I'm not using the camera now, but that's also very common these days. So you can see who you have meetings with. If you, for example, have a touch screen, you can use the whiteboard app. That's a really nice app to take notes notes that everybody can see. So it's live, right? So other people can make notes as well. So it creates this really nice collaborative experience. Yeah, I think meetings are definitely more efficient. That said, after being at home for 4 months, I'm kind of longing back to the more face-to-face meetings, but I think that balance is a little bit lost now. But that said, meetings can definitely be efficient by using Teams. And maybe you've seen some of the announcements as well. The other day, I believe a couple of days ago, they're introducing a lot more features for meetings. I forget the name. I think it looks a bit silly. It's where everybody's sitting in a classroom. And you see all the pictures. I forgot the name. It's gonna skip my mind, but you see that they're putting a lot of time and effort in that. Well, again, this one is basically pre-Corona time. You don't have to go travel to go to a meeting. You can just use Teams and do what we're doing now, right? And this is one of the more how do you say that? It's not really the most well-known one, and it's basically the live meeting experience where you can basically address a whole company and basically increase the engagement because everybody's ideally in that meeting. You can push your message. And that is something we've seen increased, of course, due to COVID-19. But yeah, it's a nice way to have like town hall meetings, for example, or use it for the management to discuss new strategy. Not normally, you know, as the other one that's missing now is the calling one. But again, as I said before, that's not in scope for my governance. Files, now saving time. Ideally, if you work together in a team, for example, for a project or a department, you know that that's the place where your files are. You shouldn't really have to look for a very long time to find the files you want to work with. Again, in an ideal situation, right? That's where adoption is also important. People need to know how it works, where to store the files. But let's just imagine everything is working out the way you want it. It goes a lot faster to find and work with your files. With smarter collaboration, we're basically meaning the way you can work together in one file. And I think if there's a lot of IT people in this call, you're probably aware this feature's been around for a long time. It's the co-authoring experience in Office, but there's still a lot of customers out there who aren't really aware that this actually existed. And that's very interesting to me because I really think it's been out for like 5 years, maybe longer, but still an excellent feature that's being continuously developed by Microsoft. And it's just faster and easier, more efficient because you don't have to email a file to each other. You can just work within the same file. And internally, we used it a lot for proposals because I work for a consultancy company. So we use it for proposals, for presentations like these. And yeah, and if you show it to a client, everybody really likes it. Everybody immediately sees the benefit of it. And of course, we don't only collaborate internally, especially these days. I think the majority is externally. You can actually really easily share files with guests or invite a guest within a team and to provide the whole collaboration experience. So you can also chat with them. So that's something we'll touch on a little bit later as well when we go more into depth about the governance part. This apps and workflow is not one of my main expertise because this is where Power Automate steps in and Flow and Power Apps. So this is not my main expertise, but I have a couple of colleagues who are really into that and they make really cool stuff. But what I really like is that you are able to streamline certain business processes by using those tools in combination with Teams. A very simple example is when we were still all at the office. You could have lunch provided by the company. So in Spark, they bought in lunch. So they just ordered it in from the supermarket. You could join, but then you had to pay for it. Now, it's not because they want you to pay, it's because of tax reasons. But what happened is that our back office employee, she basically had to like check how many people were having lunch and write it down on a piece of paper, and then go fill it into a system. Yeah, again, very old fashioned, not very efficient, and a little bit of waste of her time that she could use for other things. So a colleague created a bot the bot recognizes that you are at the office. I believe it uses the Wi-Fi, and it asks you, I believe, after 1 o'clock if you had lunch. And then it's the honorary system, because in theory you could lie. To be fair, I don't think, yeah, never say never, but I don't think many people would do that. But if you say yes, there's basically an integration available with an external tool we have that's basically used for finances. So it's automatically processed and deducted from my salary by the end of the month. So that's great, because, you know, this does save costs, because the back office employees, she can do more valuable tasks than look at who's having lunch or not. This is a simple example. You can do a lot more with this, and I think more and more will become available, because Microsoft is really pushing at this front as well. So if you're looking at digitalizing and streamlining business processes, this is definitely one I recommend looking into. So, and then what I normally do is a demo, and I just show the basics, right? So how you can chat in a channel, and how you can share files, how you can, for example, organize your teams. So you can just drag and drop, you can show, you can hide. Just try to show them the basics in like 15 minutes, so people do get a good perspective of what you just talked about and what it looks like in the real world. And ideally, you show an environment that does look real. So yeah, I often show the one we use, and of course I make sure before there's no like private stuff being shown. But if that's possible, please try to do it like that, because it just works a little bit better than you have an environment that says test 1 to 10. You know, people don't really connect with that. They need to see like real names and real content. So after I've done that, I basically summarize it with this slide. And feel free to use this slide, of course. I will add it to SlideShare, and the organization will probably make it available as well. But you can reuse it, it's totally fine. But what I summarize now is that Teams, if it's used well, will definitely increase your productivity, because you can focus more, right? You don't have to switch that much between multiple applications. And that's basically where this one steps in. And I think this is where really the power lies of Teams, is that you can do so much within the Teams client, basically almost everything apart from, let's say, checking your email. And it wouldn't surprise me that if in the near future there will be a button on the left side that says mail, and you will get some sort of like webmail interface where you can even view your mail or send mail within Teams. It wouldn't surprise me. But again, I can look at Yammer these days. I can see my calendar. I can see my OneDrive files. I can work with my SharePoint sites. I can almost do everything. And a lot of companies out there really want to accelerate their digital transformation as a company. They want to move more and more to the cloud, to be more innovative, to reduce costs. And Teams definitely helps with that, because it's a cloud-only solution, right? So that helps as well. And last but not least, with Teams, you are more compliant, or I'll talk a little bit more in a second, and it's more secure, because on one side your data is stored securely in the data centers of Microsoft, and yeah, that's something I really vouch for, because if customers don't trust that whole, I think Microsoft will have a huge issue, because then if people lose the trust in their cloud storage, yeah, that really would damage their offerings and their messaging. That said, you are responsible yourself to make sure your data is secure and compliant once it's on your devices, right? Because that's not Microsoft's responsibility, that is yours. And we'll touch a little bit on that later on. But that's something I want to emphasize on. Please make sure you really look into that part as well, right? Especially these days, where everybody works different locations, mobile devices. You would be shocked how quickly your data will be added somewhere you had no idea will ever end up. So again, so I did the demo, I did a summary, and then I asked them. It's like, so now you've seen me talk about Teams, you've seen a demo. What are your worries? So imagine that you turn this on tomorrow. What are some of your worries that what can happen? Well, I think most of them won't. I think you will have heard before, or maybe even if read somewhere before, but it's not shocking, but it's interesting, because I've done this like a lot, maybe like more than 10 times, and I haven't seen any new worries popping up. It's basically the same ones. And the first one, of course, not surprising, especially IT is really worried for an explosion of teams, that they are worried that there will be hundreds of teams maybe, and they have no idea what's going on anymore. So I always call it an explosion of teams. Duplication, right? And if you've worked with Teams and you use the out-of-the-box self-creation service, Teams never says to you, oh, wait, there is already a marketing team, right? or there is already a sales team, it just creates a new one. And then, and when you know that it's a duplicate, or that that you notice there is already one, is if you go to SharePoint and you check the URL, you see that it says sales with some random number behind it, and it's like, hey, this looks a bit off. But yeah, unfortunate that Teams doesn't do that. I'm not. Yeah, hopefully in the near future, it would be it would be a nice feature. Again, this is also from IT perspective. It can be difficult to know what the purpose is of a team. So then let's say IT wants to clean up their Office 365 tenant that I totally support. And it's like, well, this, I have a little anecdote about this later, so I want to save this one, but this stuff can be deleted that should not be deleted. The searching team is pretty bad, right? If it's not easy to find a team through the application itself. So it can be hard to find a team you want to collaborate in, right? Maybe a team is set on private that maybe shouldn't be private, right? So yeah, you can never find it, so you create a new one. This one surprised me a little bit, but also not, again, also not, is with complexity, they mean for some people it could be difficult to know how to create a team. And there's some truth in that, because if you I can't show you now, but if you think about it, you click on create new team and you immediately get two options where it says create from scratch. No, that makes sense. Or I believe the other one is connect to an existing team or Office 365 group. Yeah, that's already confusing, right? So you already have two options. And then if you dive a little bit more into it, it's not always that easy to understand for the less technical people. So I do kind of get it. I think for the techies under us, it's fine. We'll find our way. But you have to realize not everybody's as techy as you and me, for example. And even I don't consider myself always to be that techy either. And this one, I think this is the last one. This is very, this is a realistic thing that can happen. It's like, yeah, you have no idea what data is stored and who it's shared with, if you have no governance, of course. So that the risk for a data leak is very real. And it can be very damaging. It doesn't have to be, but it can really be very damaging for an organization, right? So let's say you don't do any governance, and one of these things happen. It can result into failed user adoption. People just don't know how to use it. They don't like to use it because certain things not explained in a proper way. Some governance items are not in place, and of course the maintenance increases for IT, and that results in frustration and then less support for the tool as well. So that, yeah, there will be a huge shame, because there's so much potential in using Teams within your organization, no matter what kind of organization you are. So next up for me, or for us, is we talk about the importance of governance. Why is governance important, right? And what we do now, we're still in the workshop, and in the workshop we bring together IT and business. It's very important that you don't do governance only with IT and not only with the business, because each of these, let's say, audiences, they all have their own perspective on things, and they don't always realize what the impact is of certain choices. Because because the business, like, employees, they just want to collaborate, right? They don't really, it's not like they don't care, but they don't always know what's happening in the back end, right? What can happen if certain settings aren't configured properly. They just don't know, and you can't really blame them, because, to be fair, that's not their business. And it's the same for IT. They don't always understand how frustrating certain tools are at the moment for people to collaborate, right? And how difficult it can be to do default tasks like sharing documents externally. So if you bring them together, you can really connect them, and you create some more understanding from both parties. So I think that's very critical that you bring these two together. And of course, the adoption is very important. This is something that we won't really touch on today. It becomes too long. But with adoption, you basically want to guarantee that there's a higher success rate of your team's implementation, that people like to use it, they understand why they should use it, and they also know how to use it. And within governance, you make certain decisions that impact your adoption. For example, is everybody allowed to create a team? If they aren't, how are they supposed to do it? Are they able to work with private channels? If so, what is the impact? How should they use it? So please not only do governance and think, oh, that's it, also do adoption. And also vice versa, right? Just don't think, oh, I'll do adoption, do some trainings, and I'll create some FAQ materials and it's all good. No, you need to do governance too. So these two need to be done together. It's very, very important. And of course, let's say again, you turn on Teams by default. you're probably aware that you can integrate external apps. These are Microsoft consider them as external apps, but you can select those apps. But you have external apps for like Jira. Oh man, every time I'm at this part, it slips my mind. But there's so many different apps. Like if you go through that list, I probably like 89%, I have no idea what it is. But maybe there's internal procedures where people have to request the usage of certain apps. Maybe they aren't allowed to be used. So yeah, so that's something that you need to be aware of, right? What is the impact of certain settings in Teams, and how do they correspond with your internal procedures? And of course, we also have law and regulation. Like I'm in Amsterdam, so part of Europe, and we have GDPR. So let's say I just turn on Teams and I just let people use it. Yeah, it can happen that we're not compliant with that regulation, and it can also be for the country you live in. You probably have maybe different regulations, right? So again, you need to match those against the usage of Teams. And then there are plenty of tools that can help you with that. And we'll touch a little bit on it later. It's more the compliance side of things. Last but not least, this one is a little bit more technical. I think most business users, rightfully so, would never have heard of it. Previously known as Office 365 groups, are now rebranded as Microsoft 365 groups. A lot happens. So if you create a team, it's not just a team that's created. In Azure AD, you get a new group called the Microsoft. I think they still call an Office group, but it should be called this. That has people in it, right? So let's say you didn't really do an introduction and you just turn it on, and one of your colleagues is maintaining the AAD, and he or she is like, where are all these new groups coming from? What is going on in my environment, right? So that's very important that you need to be aware that happens, and what you can do with that data, right? You can just monitor it, you can act on it. And next to that, immediately, or for some services takes a little bit longer, you can use additional services. So again, you'll get a team site, you'll get a shared calendar, you'll get a shared inbox, you'll get a group and stream for your videos. You can use Forms, Power BI, Planner, OneNote. There's a lot happening. So this also requires something from your business users, because they do need to kind of know how to work with these tools, right? And also what the impact is. And maybe you have certain separate people maintaining these services, right? No, probably not for Planner, but you probably have like an Exchange administrator or maybe a SharePoint administrator. And it will be the same for them. Like they will be like, where are all these like inboxes coming from, all these mail addresses coming from? Like, and it can happen is that they delete it, for example, right? This is the anecdote I talked about a little bit before. This is for a customer who has an Office 365 tenant. They have employees in multiple countries. They had Teams turned on, and they had no governance in place. So I believe it was in the US where somebody, I don't know why, but somebody created a team called Test. It's never a good idea, but that aside. And then the person also thought it was a good idea to upload sensitive data in the team. Again, I don't know why she thought that was a good idea. Yeah, IT sees that team or a group, and it's like, yeah, let's test. So I'm just going to throw it away. Well, thankfully, there was within the 30 days of the recycle bin period, right? So they were able to restore it, but it could have ended very badly, right? But to be fair, of course, it's kind of stupid to create a team called Test. But on the other hand, hey, you don't really have anything in place, right? You never educated people. You never have any governance in place. You can't blame him that much either. So again, that's just one anecdote. Maybe you'll have your own as well. But yeah, this is definitely a reality that can happen if you don't have any governance in place. So next up, in the workshop, just see that I messed up the slide. Well, what do we do now? We do this in a workshop, but the topics I discuss now are also part of your governance strategy. So what you do first, and I'll go down this bullet list. And unfortunately, I cannot go into depth of all of them because again, I won't be able to do it within an hour. I tried, believe me, that doesn't work. So for the majority of them, I'll keep it brief. I'm doing more in depth about the workload for Microsoft Teams. But you do need to talk about with your customer or within your organization about scope. What is the scope of your Microsoft Teams governance? Is it just, for example, a collaboration for department usage, right? Or is it more? And that's very important. And what services from Office 365 are also in scope? Because if you use Teams, You also are using OneDrive, right? Because within the application of Teams, you can view your OneDrive. If you're in a chat with a colleague or an external person and you share a file, the file is stored in your OneDrive and automatically shared with that person. But you can't expect to set up a whole governance strategy for also the whole usage of OneDrive. So that's why the scope is important as well. That you say, we do OneDrive, but just in relationship to Teams. They need to talk about vision and goals. This is also very related to adoption, but you need to be able to describe why you're doing this. What are you trying to achieve by using Teams within your organization? So what is your vision and what are your goals? Because that is something you have to communicate internally so people are aware why you're doing it. So that's a way to increase your adoption as well, that people understand why you're doing it and what are the benefits for them. You need to set up a steering committee. You can call this different too. You can call the governance board or whatever, but you need to have a group of people who, once you've decided on a strategy, you roll it out, also commit to it. So they make sure that all the agreements you agreed upon are also executed, right? And let's say, imagine you did this a year ago and then COVID-19 happens. Yeah, that has an impact on your team's rollout, right? And your team's governance. So how are you going to handle that? So you need to have a group of people who regularly come together and talk about topics like that. Roles and responsibilities. Again, this differs from one hand, admin roles. With Teams, it touches a lot of other services, SharePoint, Exchange, Azure AD. So who has that role and who is responsible for what? So who is, for example, responsible for the Teams administration center? So that really will prevent communication issues or expectation issues down the line. But it's also responsibility from an organization point of view. What is, for example, the responsibility of the compliance department? Just as an overview for Teams, right? You don't have to go too much in depth, but what is the compliance department's responsibility in relationship to Teams? This is the one we'll dive into, so I'm skipping that for now. With processes and procedures, we are talking about the employment procedure. So let's say somebody starts within your company, making sure that he or she is automatically added to a department team, gets a license. Let's say somebody moves to a different job title, gets a different job title, so he or she moves to a different department, that person is automatically transferred to that. So it reduces the need for manual rights management. And then let's say somebody leaves, how do you handle that? How do you make sure somebody's license is removed and the access is removed? And the other side of processes and procedures is working with the new features and updates. Now, I think we're all aware that Microsoft is updating Teams regularly, and also all the other services. The only tricky part is that you have this notion of targeted release, where certain features are released released in targeted release before general availability, and that targeted release you can set on your tenant, that I wouldn't do, or on a selection of people that I would do. Only Teams is not part of that. Unfortunately, it's not part of targeted release. So for Teams, you really need to monitor the message center in the portal of Office 365 frequently. For SharePoint and OneDrive that are related to Teams, they are a part of that, so that helps. But this is something, again, that requires people actively monitoring updates, trying out updates. So we'll dive more into the Microsoft Teams workload. I was trying to check my time. I think we're still good. So if you use Teams, in Teams, you just have a team, right? You create a team and it's a team. But a lot of organizations, they have different collaboration formats, right? So this is something you need to find. You need to think about naming conventions. You need to think about external access. Now, I'm just going to go through all of these and I'll dive a little bit more into them. So if you think about collaboration templates, these are the most common ones we see, right? Internally, we have, for example, departments, we have customers, and we have something called expert teams. It's basically a cross department. But this is something you have to do first. Talk with the customer or internally. Okay, what do we want to use Teams for? For what kind of sort of collaboration template? So define those. Keep it simple. Don't define 10. Make it a little bit difficult for yourself. Start with 4 or 5. And then by the end, you can also decide to just start with 2, for example. And then when everything is up and running and it goes well, you can extend it with the other 2, right? But this is something you definitely have to do. Then you need to think about the naming policy, right? What you can do, for example, is work with Azure AD, where you can automatically add a word. So, for example, the word collaboration, and a prefix. For example, COB, right? It's an abbreviation of collaboration. Or you can do this as suffix, similar. And that can be automatically retracted from the Azure AD. So you can, for example, say if somebody creates a team, that he or his or her department is automatically added. There's an option. To be fair, I never see this in the real world, but I always want to address it that it is possible. You can use a provisioning solution, and this can be your own solution. This can be an external solution. There are a lot of companies out there who have one, Provision Point, AvePoint, or many, many more. You can leave it up to the employee. Well, I think we'll know, people will forget, but that's an option. Or you don't do one, and that's fine too, because in my eyes, the naming policy is optional. There needs to be a real business case for that. But what you do now, you define your templates, and then per template, you're going to discuss, do we need a naming policy per template? So for example, we work with projects. As a customer, you can say how every time somebody creates a project or a project is created through provisioning, it needs to say PRLJ and a name that's been applied to the name of the team. And for example, this can be done for provisioning, for SharePoint as well. So you can see PROJ dash name of the project site. Optional, but there's a lot of customers who want to use this, and by the end of this one, I have a use case why a certain customer decided to use it. What are some advantages and challenges? It does improve the findability, because finding teams can be very difficult. And let's say for every project you have to, the word PROJ is added. You just search for that and you get a list of projects. That's easier than something is called mobile portal or internet portal. It's a bit harder to find, so it can definitely help. Some challenges is what I said before, is that Azure naming policy is just not great, because you need to have an up-to-date AAD that most customers still don't really have. And it's also not really flexible with multiple collaboration templates. Because let's say you want to use, you say from that policy, every time a word is added when somebody creates a team, try to find a word that kind of emphasizes all those templates you just defined. It's just not really possible. And when you do a self-service scenario, so another provisioning, most employees will just forget they have to apply a naming policy, right? And that you can't really blame them. It's just something that goes fast and just forget about it. It's just not going to remember. So my advice is only apply when it's necessary. And here's just one of our customers was a local district, and they shared their tenant with multiple, with a couple of external organizations and a couple other districts, and they wanted to use that naming convention, naming policy. So for people, it's clear to which this district a certain team belongs, and then I totally understood. It's like, yeah, I totally get that. We should definitely do that. But if there's not really a case like this, don't get really too hung up on a naming policy, right? External access, a couple options. You can enable it for all teams, a selection of teams, or you disable it. And these days, you can also use sensitivity labels. So where sensitivity labels were used for data classification purposes, among other things, you can now extend that label and apply some options for teams, SharePoint sites, Microsoft 365 groups. And I'll show you I think I have a screenshot later on as well. Yeah, when I go more into the compliance part, I remember I have a couple of screenshots. So what are some advantages and challenges of external access? The advantages are it definitely reduces shadow IT. And I think this is one of the main reasons shadow IT existed or exists, is that people wanted to share content with external people. It's also more efficient, because you don't have to send emails with an attachment, you get it back and you have to process it. It's just very time consuming. The challenges lie in that data classification becomes very crucial, because you can be like, oh well, we have this team with sensitive content, but people have to be invited to be part of it. Yeah, that's correct. But if you don't put any data classification in place, you have no control over what will happen with the data once it's downloaded from the team, because by default there's nothing really in there preventing that, right? So they can really, the risk into like a data leak is very real. The owners are the only ones who are able to invite external people. So the responsibility lies with them. So you need to be sure that they're able to handle that responsibility, that are aware of it. And again, this is where adoption comes into place as well. My advice, that said, I do advise to turn it on for all teams. Because there are other options to manage it. And I think if you don't do it, it will end up in shadow IT. That said, I definitely understand there are teams with really highly sensitive content. There are still ways to just disable it for that team. You always have that option, but I would turn it on by default. You could use Azure Access Reviews. You do need a P2 Azure AD P2 license. I don't know the pricing at the top of my head. I don't know if it's just as expensive as it used to be, but be aware you need that. What it does, you can apply a review policy for a selection of teams where the owners get a notification where they have to review all members. So it can also be internal members, but also guests. And they can immediately say, okay, this person doesn't need access anymore, and it's automatically removed. You can also create your own solution, because there are, of course, APIs that you can tap into. I believe you can use the Microsoft Graph, actually. I think it's a Microsoft Graph. You can use that to also create your own solution out there. You also have social control, because people do notice if there's an external person in there, because you see it within the name. It says guest between brackets, right? So that's why I say, just turn it on, because let's say you have a department, people will be like, hey, why is this external person in there, right? That definitely helps. Education, as I talked about before, and definitely start with data classification. You really need to start setting up a project that dives into that topic. Expiration period. So again, you have a couple options. You can apply an expiration period for all teams, a selection or none. And with an expiration period, you basically say, once this period has passed, so let's say you set it for 6 months, 30 days before, that's 6 months. So I create a team now. The timer starts it's 6 months from now, 30 days before that. It's a bit confusing, I'm sorry. 30 days before that, the owners will receive an email that will ask them, do you want to keep or do you want to remove? I don't know if they call it remove, but do you want to keep or archive or whatever they call this team? So if they say keep, that 6 months period is extended again. If they say remove or archive, that team with all its content, right? It's not just Teams, it's also SharePoint, OneNote, Planner, everything that's connected to the team will be moved to a recycle bin, will stay there for 30 days, and then it will be automatically deleted, and there's no way to get it back if you don't have any additional backup in place. But if you use the standard, it's gone. If they don't respond when it's with those 30 days, 15 days later, they get another notification. If they again don't respond, they get it the day before. And if they don't respond, it will do it automatically. Let's say you have a team without owners, there is an option to add an email address in the Azure AD portal where those notifications are sent. So IT can be up to date from, there's mails being sent, but nobody's replying. The only downside beforehand is that if you set that policy, people who were using a team also got that notification. And it's a bit weird because like I'm using this team, why I'm getting this notification. So they created something called an activity check. So the system periodically checks if the team is still being used, and it does it for SharePoint. So it looks at file activity, and it looks at Teams activity. This one is very simple. It looks if a channel has been opened, and there's also one for mail, but that one is more used for the Outlook groups that can also be used for collaboration. I don't think many people do, but it can. So what are some advantages and challenges by using expiration period policy? And again, you have to define this per template, right? Don't forget about it, right? So that's why I put it first. So first you define your collaboration templates, and if every time you go over this topic, naming policy, yes or no, yeah, expiration period, yes or no, external access, yes or no. So you have to do that per collaboration template. And why that's necessary will come up soon, and then we'll all fall into place. Definitely advantages, you keep your environment clean, right? Your environment doesn't have teams that are just not being used. It does reduce maintenance for IT because it's done automatically and they don't have to do it manually. They can, but they don't have to. That's what I said. If something is removed, you rely on the Microsoft backup and restore procedures. So for the teams, there's 30 days. After the 30 days, everything is basically gone. So that's something you have to review as well. And that's, again, believe after this one, we'll talk a little bit about backup and restore. The responsibility definitely lies with the owners, because if they don't respond, yeah, there's a risk that it will be removed, right? So again, adoption, explain. If you have the role of an owner, these are your roles. These are not your roles. That is your role. These are your responsibilities. Yeah, of course, and you need to think about your retention/archiving policies, because maybe certain teams aren't allowed to be removed because they contain content that needs to be saved for X amount of years because of certain regulations. And we'll touch this for a little bit in a second as well. So I would advise to turn it on for a year, and that's often long enough. And then what you can also do, you can also change it. You can also bring it back to 6 months, or you can even do it longer. But I noticed from doing these projects that a year is often sufficient. So yeah, that would be my advice. Yeah, definitely also look at your retention policies. So what I said before, so that you can prevent that teams aren't removed that should not have been removed. Privacy, you have 3 options. Again, these are very self-explanatory, but yeah, a team can be private. So that means that the owners have to invite people to be part of the team. There is a setting, it's a preview setting, where owners can say, okay, this team is private, but I don't mind if people find the team, and then they can request to become a member. So there's an option that's available. It's a preview option. Public means that everybody can become a member or can view the content. Organization-wide basically means if you create a team, everybody within your tenant, only internal people, not external people, will become a member. So it's a little bit of like a sort of like a Yammer replacement that I did see some purpose in before Yammer rebranded and actually became really like a really good tool, service again. But that's at least what it does. And you can, I think there's a max of 5. I don't see a lot of usage for this, but it can be because of the customers I work with. It maybe differs per industry, but the main ones are private and public. My advice would be, if it's possible, please go for open by default. So you promote knowledge sharing, and it's be easier for people to discover content, and they can find new people if that's possible. So open by default, and be aware that owners can always change the privacy setting. So this is from private to public and public to private. From the org-wide, you cannot change. So again, it's something you have to decide per collaboration template. So how does backup and restore works? Well, teams are stored for 30 days in a recycle bin. Channels, they also have a recycle bin for 30 days. Content works with the SharePoint recycle bin, so it's 93 days. Videos are stored in also recycle bin. I believe that's it. So there's no recycle bin for tasks. And maybe missing something, but a task and chat. They don't have any recycle bin, so that's something you need to be aware of. So with backup, it's just very important that you review your regulations and internal agreements to see if those are, if what Microsoft offers, if that's sufficient. If it's not, look into third-party vendors. If you live in the Netherlands, KPN does one as well. AvePoint is internationally very well known. They have a really good solution. I've seen a demo of it, really, really well done. Be aware there's some cost included, of course, because those vendors need to store your data for a long period of time. So that's something you have to check yourself. And again, to prevent this, you have to again look into these retention rules, your policies, to prevent accidental deletion of maybe even chat and the content. So now we dive a little bit more into compliance side of things. So sensitivity labels were previously known as Azure information, but it was done in Azure information protection. Now all moved to the Office 365, sorry, Office 365 Compliance Center. Traditionally used to classify your documents. Hey, for example, you could say this presentation is which one do we have? Internal, for example. And it means if this presentation is then sent external, people cannot open it. Only people in InSpark email can open it, for example. Well, now it's been extended. So now you can also attach a label to a team. And there are a couple options. So you can say when this label is used, the team is automatically set on public or private. Guest access is allowed or blocked. And unmanaged devices, you can block or limit the access to the SharePoint content. So for devices that aren't hybrid ID joined or compliant in Intune. And that basically means they can, for example, only use the web version to access files, or they can also use their local Office applications, or they cannot access the files at all if they're not compliant. If you use this, and again, this is not my expertise, the whole Intune and everything, but if you do this, please talk to people who do maintain those policies, so that doesn't intervene or not connect with with each other. Because I heard from one of my colleagues who said, yeah, if you guys use this, we see something popping up in Intune in a policy. He said it's fine, but please be aware that happens. Very, very important to realize. Don't think that if you apply a label highly sensitive to a team, all the content is automatically applied with the same label. That's not the case. Unfortunately, I think that would be a nice option. I'm very positive that will eventually happen in the near future, but for now it doesn't. So you have to do it manually or through auto labeling. So here's just a screenshot I use from our own demo environment. So in a sensitivity label menu, you have an additional option called site and groups, where you can see these three options again. This was previously in preview, but I think it's been now for a week or 2 weeks. It's been general available, so you can already start using this. And this is what it can look like. So for example, I pick the confidential internal label, and I can only use a team with the private privacy option. And for example, let's say external access is blocked, I just cannot invite somebody. So I would advise definitely you look into this. It's really can be really valuable, and definitely for the self-service scenarios where people have to pick a label for the team they are creating. And yeah, maybe you're also thinking now, oh well, maybe people can downplay it. It's very true, but then you have something to use against them. Like, hey, you picked, I don't know, public, and you put content in there that's internal content. Yeah, you know what I mean? So you have something to go back to people like hey, you're doing this on purpose, for example. Again, not only use the labels for this, but really start your data classification project. Do that separately, because you cannot do that also within your team's governance workshop, because the impact is still pretty high for companies, because it's a different way of working. It's a different understanding how to work with content, and that's too much to put this all in this workshop. And it's basically the case for all these compliance options they'll discuss now as well. For example, like DLP. So with DLP, you can prevent the sharing of sensitive content. Familiar options are credit card numbers, IBAN numbers, social security numbers. So you can prevent that by using DLP. You can also do it for documents. So the first one is really for chat, and the other one is for documents. And again, this is a really valuable feature, but something you have to start up in a separate project. For some reason, I still don't know why, if you want to use DLP for chat, you need an E5 license. I don't know why. Maybe it will change, but it's weird, because for SharePoint and OneDrive, you don't. So this is what it will look like. So I post an image. I posted some demo text. You see, it's all gibberish, but there is like an IBAN number in there, so like an account number. It immediately says this is blocked, and then also like a message pops up in number 3. Then in number 4, I can, for example, see why that is. So this is text you can just create yourself. You can also give people the option to override, and you can also give them an option to report it to an admin saying like, I don't understand why this has been blocked, because it's still technology, so it's not always 100% fail-proof. I don't know if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, it's not with DLP and then auto labeling, it's not 100% yet. So there can be cases that it doesn't really make sense why something is blocked. So it's always nice to give people the option to report it. So this is what it looks like. Oh, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. Let me see. I think I pressed the wrong button. Where are we? Let's see. Here we are. So yeah, this one. It's never happened before. It's the first for everything. So this is what it looks like for SharePoint or OneDrive. It's same. Again, I upload a document. It recognizes that it contains sensitive information. I get a policy tip, and I see that basically the same screen I saw in Teams as well. My advice: again, match this with your regulations, your internal procedures, and how you want to use Teams or are using Teams. Please do a lot of testing. DLP doesn't always work the way you expect it to work. Sometimes you need to do more fine tuning. It has impact. As you notice, people can get this message and they can be like, oh, why am I getting this? So please communicate before you turn this on, right? And tell them why it is. Again, very important. Why is this so important? I have 12 more minutes. I think it should be good. Again, a couple things are repeating itself now, but please, please start it up as a separate project. Retention. So with retention, you have a couple options. You can retain content or chat for an X period. And with X period, I mean an amount, X amount of days, months, or years. You can also retain and delete it after that period, or just delete it after the period. So these are the options you have. For now, I believe for private channels, for chat, retention is still not supported. If you check the documentation, it's also up to date, but I believe I checked recently, it's still not there. For files, it is. That works. Again, you have to match it with this. Test it out. Well, because, yeah, it's very important that you know for certain that it works and how it works. Similar. So see, these are ones that are the same, but please, they are very crucial. So now we finally, you're probably thinking when he's going to talk about this. The reason I do this last is because all these things before, naming policy, external access, expiration period, privacy, for these collaboration templates, basically determine if people can use the self-service options within a Microsoft Teams application, or you need to set up some sort of provisioning solution. Yeah. Yeah. So so what you can do, you can sorry. So the first one, you can say, okay, people can use the application. People can, or everybody, or just a selection of people can use the application. But that's an option you have too. You can create a security group, an Azure AD, and just assign that a security group with permissions to create and Microsoft 365 group. So that means a team. You can also could do it in a controlled way with, for example, an approval, and that's basically done by a provisioning solution that can be for all employees. Sorry, I was waiting for this slide. So how is it determined if you can use self-service or provisioning? Basically, the collaboration format. What I see is that often when you define 3 or 4, there's not always, escaping sounds negative, but there's no really getting around using provisioning. But let's say you don't have any collaboration formats. Here, there's less need for a provisioning solution. Then maybe there's a unique naming policy, like I talked about before with those local districts. Yeah, for them, the naming policy they have, that doesn't work with the self-service creation. So with them, we have to set up a provisioning solution. And again, that's totally fine, right? This not means it's bad. But of course, the ideal situation for employees is self-service. But you don't have to make it difficult by using provision. Maybe you have really strict external access policies, so my advice doesn't work, right? You can say, "Oh, Jasper, I know what you mean. I think we should also turn it on, but it just doesn't work for us." That's fine. Maybe there are really different expiration policies. They're so far from apart that 1 year doesn't work anymore. So those things can basically determine if you have to use provisioning, yes or no. And for provisioning, we have our own solution, but we use it for more easier business cases or business scenarios. You have Provision Point, AvePoint, and they're I'm probably forgetting one. There are more companies who do this. So you don't have to do it yourself. If you don't have the time or resources, please you look into an external party that can help you with that. So that's basically that whole setup. Then what you also shouldn't forget is look at the policies in Teams. And these are some Microsoft Teams overall settings. So you can allow people to discover private teams. And that's what I mentioned before, that an owner can say, although my team is private, I don't mind if people can discover it. And private channels, you can turn it on or off, or you can turn it on or off for a selection of people. You can also adjust your message policies where you, for example, allow people to modify or delete their messages. You can turn off giveaways. You can manage the read receipts. Those what you have in WhatsApp as well. If you can see if somebody's read your message, you can look at your apps. I'm not going to allow all apps. I'm going to specify some apps that I can use, or I block third-party apps, for example. You can turn on or off tagging. You can turn on or off those third-party file storage solutions that you can interact with from within the Files tab. So then again, you've done the workshop, and then basically you discuss all these topics, and you need to get an agreement on it, right? Try to advise your customer with most of the experiences you have, some recommendations you have, add it into a document. It can also be a presentation or a SharePoint page, whatever, so long it's added somewhere that people can view it. If you do it as an external consultant, for example, somebody like me, you have to present your findings. So you basically go over the key topics, and then you say, okay, this is what you've decided because of this and that. And then basically you finalize your governance strategy. So everybody's aware, okay, we're going to roll out Microsoft Teams. These are our policies, these are the collaboration templates, we're using provisioning, etc., etc. Everybody's agreeing upon it, and that strategy is finalized. But it's not forever, because the world changes, Microsoft Teams changes, so you need to keep updating it. And that's why that steering committee is so crucial, because that's their responsibility to make sure that governance strategy is being updated accordingly, of course. Of course, there can be some decisions you've made that you have to implement, right? So again, there can be an agreement upon that you need a provisioning solution. So that's something you have to roll out, right? Or, for example, I really like, for example, ShareGate Apricot that doesn't do provisioning, but does give you some really good tools to do monitoring, to give more responsibility to the owners, right? Or maybe you want to have to use AvePoint, their cloud governance for Office 365 offering. Again, you can do your own, but you need to implement it. That's often really the case, what I see with every customer. Or some settings, right? Maybe they don't want to use private channels. You need to turn it off, right? So I was looking at my phone, like, am I going to make it? But I think it was still good. I still have 5 minutes. So what I will do, I will look at the chat, and I will answer some questions if there are questions. You can always send me an email, or contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or take a look at my blog. Sorry for the big picture of my face, but yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I appreciate you listening in. Are you free Saturday? I know it's a silly joke, but yeah, I do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it valuable. Feel free to use the content, and if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And then, yeah, thank you for your time, and then I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. And of course, also thanks to the organization for organizing this event.
Thank you, Jasper. It's a nice way to say, like, Tom Hanks, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to see that.
Yeah, silly, yeah.
It's really wonderful session, and it was tons of information, to be honest. Like, governance is not the easy task.
No, it's a lot. Yeah, it sometimes surprises me how much time goes into it, but it is important. Yeah, so yeah.
It is, yeah, and especially like when I work with those enterprises where always it's been asked, like, how are you going to classify all your information? How are you going to protect that information? And it's a good way to do it. I understand, like, Microsoft is still working towards making the product more robust. But DLP and the classification information you have shared, which is really, really good and very informative. So yeah, thank
Great.
you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it.
So yeah, we got just messages from our attendee, just thank you again for the great session. And just to share the message saying, like, we as a 365 Saturday, we're trying every possible way to provide a bridge between all the speakers, bloggers, audiences, and make sure, like, we try and share or organize some topics in a way that, like, it provides a lot of knowledge to you all. And also, not only that, like, being even host, we do learn a lot as well every day. So it's, again, thank you to all the speakers. So we got 3 minutes to go. Are there any questions? Anyone like to unmute yourself and ask the question? Okay, so we haven't got any more questions yet. Thank you, Jasper.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Have a nice one. So we got next session coming up from Marcin. Marcin is an Office 365 consultant and architect. He's going to present a session on one team to rule them all, teams in project management. So all the project managers out there, it's going to be a very, very interesting session for you guys. So just hold tight for another next 2 minutes before Marcin starts his session. Marcin, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Hi. Hi, guys.
Hi, Marcin. So just to quickly brief about the session will cover in terms of aggregating project data for multiple sources and tools within the teams. Marcin will use tabs, custom apps, Power Apps, Flow, Power BI, and other services to create automated ultimate workplace for project management. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to it. Marcin, we can see you and we can hear you loud and clear as well.
Okay, so start sharing my screen.
Sure.